people can do that, continue to put the effort against the things that they're not as great at, just so they can say keep a job or do these other things. And I understand in parts of people's careers they need to do that. But if we're thinking about what long-term success can be and where you can, realize the most extraordinary gains and extraordinary success, is putting your efforts and passion against the things that you're already naturally really good at.
This is By Joey Joanne Season 2. I'm your host, Joanne Chan, and every Wednesday we bring you inspiring stories, powerful message, and fun conversations with me and my special guests and friends, and it's my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. This podcast is for you if you're looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life. Now let's dive into today's episode and get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Joining us today is a certified professional coach and the author of the book Boss and Brains, a framework for living your best life by overcoming fears and maximizing strengths. He brings decades of experience as a four-time global C-suite executive and former Google sales leader. He has led at scale, made high-stakes decisions, and lived inside the pressure that comes with responsibility and ambition. However, at 40 years old, he flatlined in a hospital bed, and that moment forced him to confront not just his health, but how he was defining success and the internal fears driving his choices. And that changed everything. Today, he coaches from lived experience, not theory. He helps leaders and professionals align who they are with what they do so success feels energizing instead of exhausting. So, ladies and gentlemen, help me in welcoming our very special guest today, the author of Boss and Brains, the one and only Chris Woods. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Joanne. I'm very excited about our time together.
I'm sure I'm even more excited than you. So, I'm talking to an ex Google, so I have so many questions. What led you down the path of becoming a coach today from such a successful career? So we'll start with your story. The turning point that changed everything for you, which is in your story you mentioned that you flatlined in a hospital bed at 40 years old despite having a highly successful career. So can you walk us through what happened and how it changed your life and your definition of success?
Sure thing. So I think the biggest kind of lesson I took from it, of reflecting back on, was that uh, though I had achieved a lot of professional and personal success by 40, when I awoke in the hospital bed after having flatlined for a minute and 5 seconds, and then eventually was given a cleaner bill of health, and they told me I should have another 50 years ahead of me. I was like, okay, so how am I going to spend that next 50 years? And so looking back upon what got me to through the first 40 years, I knew it wasn't going to be the same things that would get me through the next part of it. So I'll talk about the lessons first, and then I will tee up the rest of the conversation, and then I'll just do a quick little background how I got there. And really the biggest thing, that the takeaway that I've learned from this, is to share with people about the importance of kind of living from their heart, no pun intended in terms of flatlining, but leaning into the things that bring them joy, which resonates with you, um, and the things that they're inherently good at, and being able to identify the things that I oftentimes called head trash, things that would keep me and others playing small, pulling back and doing the things that they think that they should be doing, as opposed to the things that actually light them up. So a quick lead up to the 40. I grew up in the States, in part of Boston, Massachusetts. One of the things that ended up teeing up as undergraduate, I earned my degree in finance, and I knew I hated it. It just wasn't for me, but I was doing it because I knew I needed that so that I could pay the bills when I got out of school. So I graduated with that degree in finance and started off doing finance related gigs, and really knew then and there that I didn't like it. But part of me was like, all right, well, this is the deal. You need to just kind of endure this and earn a living. But part of me was telling me, even in my 20s, I'm like, that's a long road ahead to be doing something that doesn't make you happy. So I was able to maneuver my way into more marketing and sales roles, and moved to New York City and worked in the entertainment business, more in marketing related roles. I was recruited by Google when they were building out an office back up in Boston. So they relocated me and my family from New York up to Boston, and I helped build out the office. So I led sales teams and then eventually led some global teams. Was stationed in London for a year and helped train sales teams there, and then ran a global industry relations team. So that got me to the point of 40, and then I looked at then what comes after that. So I'll take a breather there, but the point that I remember mentioning to you before we got on the air here is one of the things is I have a tattoo. It's Celtic, and it's the symbol of joy, and the whole idea of that that's kind of the measure of life, and that is kind of your north star. And I think that that's made all the difference in my next 40 years. I have a full sleeve of tattoos that kind of match my story, but that was afterwards.
Wow, that is really intense, to tattoo your whole arm based on your story. I mean, wow,
Yeah.
yeah. Sure. So, what did you do after you got out of hospital?
So I took an inventory about what I wanted to do next, and was able to do some research and find what are some other ways that I could be applying my skills and other things that I could do. So I eventually became a chief revenue officer or chief growth officer for several different investor backed companies, because I realized that my skill set and the things that really made me happy was either building things, building companies, or turning them around, going into underperforming companies and being able to improve them. So that was things that really lit me up, and that's the joy that I would have in it. And it was a combination of really enjoying doing it and then finding out that I was actually really good at it, so I could point to the fact that I felt like I was really contributing, as opposed to, not that any offense to anybody else, but if I had stayed at Google, there's 183,000 employees there, and it was harder for me to feel like I could apply my skills and passion to make a real impact that I could point to. And so those are the things that I did after that, and then eventually got to the point through a lot of the things that I now coach my my clients on, is not only identifying what they're really good at, but what lights them up and what their personality lends itself to. And so for me, it's really building things and helping people. So that's how I ended up going off in building a coaching business, and I've been doing this now for 4.5 years. And it's been a real joy for me to be able to apply the lessons I've learned, the passion I have, to be able to really see that I'm driving impact for people. And I do it, as you mentioned, kind of in my bio intro, I do it from lived experience as opposed to, say, just theory.
Right. So you mentioned about two things, right? One is the thing that you are good at. This is what you coach people, to do the things they are good at and also do the things they enjoy, if I'm not understanding it wrongly. But again, you see, I believe there are certain things that we are good at, but we don't necessarily enjoy doing it, right? I'm sure you can think of something, right, that you are really good at but you don't really enjoy doing. On the other hand, which is the things that we really enjoy but maybe we suck at it, right? So would you say the best case scenario is to find something that we are really good at and also we enjoy doing it?
That's right, and so I agree with that 100%. And the way that I end up working with clients on that is moving beyond just discussion on that. Is I actually have them take diagnostic tests, so we actually have some data to ground our discussion and our strategy in. So around strengths, I often encourage them to use Clifton Strength Finders or other things that are like that, right? So it's a standardized test that you take that then provides you with an output and says, based upon these 64 different things, these are the top 5 strengths that you have. You can also extend it into top 10, but what I always try to recommend is we really focus on those top 5. And it shows the top 5 things that you're really good at, and maybe why you're good at it, and then gives you some suggestions on how you can be doing that more in your life. So that's one thing. But then I also overlay on that conversation is how much of that are you currently doing? So, for example, in your current role or your current strategy, your current career, you might be only leveraging two out of those five. So, is there a way, as opposed to blowing up your career, is how can we maybe add on responsibilities in your current role or ones that you can build, as well as maybe peel off some of the things that you're currently doing that you're not really as good at, to be able to allocate to somebody else and get you into the more into the position that you're leveraging and doing, and ideally getting paid for the top five things that you're really good at. So that's the Clifton Strengths Finders. There's other ones, but that's my favorite one around the strengths. And then around the things that potentially kind of hold you back, around fears as well as personality. There's another standardized exam that I love taking called the Enneagram, and that will provide out a personality type, and as well as within that, how fear shows up for you. So, what are the things that you either respond to in fear, or when there are times of growth, as opposed to contracting, how do you show up during that? And how do we get you to be able to be not only be aware of that, but to spend more time in those growth areas? Because what I say, and I had mentioned to these in our pre-call, Joanne, is that I recognized in myself a lot of times that I felt like I was driving a car, but not feeling confident enough to put it into a fifth gear, for example. And maybe I get it up to third, but I always had the emergency brake on, I felt like. So you could, if you imagine that, you can maybe hear the gears grinding, that you weren't really trusting you as a driver as well as the machine that you were in, and you weren't really kind of letting it rip. And I find if we use this as a starting point to talk about maybe limiting beliefs and other things that are in your head, and I sometimes call that head trash, things that you maybe aren't analyzing or over analyzing, that hold you back from actually being able to put it in fifth gear and actually run it.
Mm. So how do we identify our biggest, most rooted fear? Because that is a place that most people don't want to go, right? To explore their deep and biggest fear, and that's the last thing that we want to do. So how do we do that?
So I think the first step, as opposed to going super deep on that, is what I have found to be really resonating with me and my clients, is actually a quote from Peter Crone, and he asks people to think about this: is who would you be in the absence of your concerns? So asks people to think about that. Who would you be in the absence of your concerns? Now that's an invitation to think about it, right? It's not to say, tell me all the things that you're afraid of. I'm saying now just use the right side of your brain and envision the person you'd be, the life you would lead, how you would approach life on a day to day and week basis without the concerns that you have,
Mm.
right? So, for example, if I have that with somebody who holds back, who is concerned about, overly potentially concerned about how others feel about them, or what they think, or what their friends would say, or what their family would say, or what perception is. I say, who would you be without that? They're like, well, I'd feel a lot lighter. I would operate from, strength, and I'd be okay with embracing the things that I know bring me joy, as opposed to worrying about what people say about me, or what's that voice that maybe is holding me back, that came from being embarrassed when I was a freshman in high school. And so it's really an invitation to think about that, because, I don't necessarily have the answers for my client, but I can help them get there, that we can build the answers together. So that would be my answer to you, is how do you actually do that? Because the other overarching way that I get people to think about it is another quote by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he said, and I want to make sure I get this right, he says, our job in this lifetime is not to shape ourselves into some ideal we ought to be, but to find out who we already are and become it. So if we can find that, I think that's on the other side of asking that question of who would you be in the absence of your concerns.
Yeah, I love that quote. Yeah, I believe that's a beautiful starting point, right? To just gently, exploring what could be, right? Your biggest fear, and what could you be without your fear. What would you say? And we talk about the limiting beliefs and fear-based pattern. What would you say are some of the most common fears or limiting beliefs that you see in high achievers or highly successful people?
So it's a fear that both holds them back as well as has driven them, right? And I think a lot of that, it's a double-edged sword, and it's the fear of failure, right? Because a lot of times people who are overachievers identify with being an overachiever, with being a success. And it ends up becoming, a lot of the ways that I think it is, that more that they do it, it's like the higher they're getting up, they perceive the higher the tightrope is over the ground, right? And they then see these, as opposed to I'm driving towards something, they're operating a lot of times against what I could now lose. What is fearful of, do I lose the feeling like I'm being perceived as being a success? Or I can't show that I have anything less than a 100% or 95% win rate. And that becomes part of the limits. That if you can then say, all right, that has been very helpful for me to get to this point, but it's now limiting me, right? So it's not where I'm going to be able to go from here. So I love telling little stories, and this is another one about that, right? It's an old parable about a person who needs to get from one side of a turbulent river to another. He wants to go start a new life on another side, and he doesn't have a raft, he doesn't have another way to go. He won't be able to swim across. So he looks around, he finds a lot of branches, he puts a lot of things together. He finds twigs, he finds, uh, you know, long, long strips from trees, and puts them together and puts together a makeshift raft, and finds, a giant log that he can use kind of as a row. So he puts it in the water, he battles across and gets there, and now has got to the other side of the town. And he's so grateful that he's gotten to the other side, he puts his raft on his back and carries it, because he's like, I might need this again. This thing saved my life. I'm probably going to need this again. I want to keep this with me because I might. He ends up then establishing a new life in this new area, is very happy, but people start recognizing, oh, he's the guy who walks around with that giant raft on his back. So one day he has a conversation with an older, wiser person, and they ask him, "What is that?" And he's like, "Oh, well, this thing saved my life. It got me from where I was to where I needed to be now, and you know, I might need this again." So he's asked, he's like, "Do you ever plan on going back to that other part of, that other side of the?" And he's like, "No, this is my life now." He's like, "You don't need to be carrying that raft around anymore. It really is kind of a burden that you can put down. You can be grateful that it helped get you here, but you're here now, and you can be a lot lighter, and this part of your life no longer requires that raft." So he detaches and puts the raft down, and you know, straightens his back for the first time in years. And he's like, wow, I can't believe how much lighter I feel. Thanks the person for the advice, and then walks on with the rest of his life. So I always use that as the analogy, is you can be grateful for the things that got you to where you are now, but at some point you need to put them down because they're not what's going to get you to the next part.
Right. It's easier said than done, right? How do we let go? It could be a mistake in the past, a failure, past failure, right? In limiting belief, right? How do we truly let go?
So I think it's a great question. The first part is to actually do the work to identify what that is. Because a lot of times my clients haven't given themselves, the time, or haven't been actually given the exercise that I give them to actually think about it and articulate what that is. It's just kind of in their head, it's generalized. So let's identify what it actually is, and then it ends up becoming conversations. But where I end up then trying to use beyond just kind of qualitative, I try to use kind of quantitative and frameworks to show that we're making progress. Is a framework that I talk about in my book, is the TEA, thoughts, emotions, and actions, that you and your audience may already be aware of. But oftentimes that can be a really powerful thing, is to then be able to help you analyze that. It's like, all right, when this is coming up for you, the things that you're having a hard time holding back and letting go of, when you think about the action that's coming out, let's back solve. So what's the thought that's coming up for you? Okay. And then when that thought comes up, what's the emotion that it's then triggering? And then in response to that emotion, what's the action? So are you either going and doing something or are you avoiding it? And it's being able to then apply as opposed to just straight up discussion and like, hey, you should work on that. It's more like, let's actually break it down. No shame at all involved in this. It's just like, things can only be worked on when they're brought to the light. So then what's that TEA, the thought, emotion, and action that you're using? And then invite the conversation is what would be an alternative thought you could have on that. So when you're saying about beating yourself up over something that happened in the past, if the current one is, I can't believe I screwed that up, that emotion is shame. And then the action is telling yourself you're not good enough, or maybe you just put it in and you push yourself harder and you just push things down. What could be another way of thinking about that? If you think about that thought that happened, that failure in the past, you could think about that was like, that was a lesson, and it's in the past. So what's the emotion? The emotion could be gratitude instead, that I learned that and I lived from it and I'm on the other side of it. And now the action could be, whew, that no longer controls me. I've extracted the lesson and now I'm acting on it. So I either am doing what I've learned from it, or the action is I'm avoiding what I've learned not to do. And so I find that these are a lot more empowering for people, because once you do that, it then takes practice, right? So the old TEA has built up these neural pathways for years, and you're not going to just, switch it. I'm not, hypnotizing you and having you do something else. It's more like, how do we now establish this and help you work on it? So that ends up then becoming a lot of the things when I'm working with people on a regular basis is I help them with, identifying what they're really good at, what have been the fears that have been holding them back. And now based on that, what are our new goals? What then is the new mindset you'll need to have on a daily and weekly basis? And then lastly, what are the habits that you'll need to be doing on a daily basis that convert the energy of thought actually into action? So it's very empowering because it actually lays it out for people that they're like, I can actually take control of this and operate from a position of my strengths, more now freed from burdens that have been, built up over the years. And how about that? Then you're actually operating, at the full capacity that you were put here on earth to do.
All right. Okay, there are two different things that I want to talk to you about. Okay, let's start with. I would say I really love where this is going, but I would love to talk about your book for a bit more. Okay, let's start with your book first. Boss and brains. I mean, why? Where does the concept come from? Why do you call it boss and brains? And what is boss and what is brains? Can you first define that for us?
Sure. So I named it Balls and Brains because it's an attention grabber of, you know, an audience for people in this, short attention span world. People are like, what is that? And the idea then around the balls part of it is really around identifying the fears that are holding you back. And what I often say is that when other people think that another person exhibits having, quote, balls or courage, oftentimes that's them attributing to someone else the fear that they have. So, for example, if you say that somebody's got a lot of courage because he can go up on stage and perform in front of 10,000 people, that's because you perceive that as you're fearful of it. So a lot of times is now, how do we cast a light on the things that you are afraid of? That everybody has fears, but the intention is, are these fears holding you back from living the most joyful, productive, authentic life that you have? And then the brains part of it is not about being, good in school. It's about knowing what you're really good at and going all in on that. What I always say is you're playing full offense on your strengths as opposed to playing defense on your weaknesses. And both of those things really, the starting part is awareness, because oftentimes we're just running on autopilot. And what I always say, we're grinding, right? So we're just, the gears aren't moving the way that they should in unison, but we're just pushing through anyway, because this is the only way we know how, or our head's telling us, stop complaining, just do it. Or I know I don't really love this, but it's a job and I get paid for it. So how can we get you away from grinding and more into flowing? So that's where the title of the book comes from. And then these two components about working on strengths and identifying, the fears that hold you back are the first two steps in like a 5-step program that I do with my coaching clients.
That leads perfectly to my second question, which is, yeah, let's talk about strengths and weaknesses, because throughout the conversation you talk about focusing, leveraging your strength. You hardly talk about weaknesses at all. So why do you believe that maximizing your strength is more powerful than working on your weaknesses?
So thank you for asking that question. I think that that's the real crux of it. And so what I say is applying a growth mindset to your strengths, as opposed to oftentimes historically what a growth mindset oftentimes refers to is people then being open to and committed to working on things that they're not as good at, right? And what I say on that is talk about a return on investment. You can, I feel, get a better return on investment by going after things that you're already good at. So an example I give is the legendary basketball player Michael Jordan is widely considered to be the best basketball player of all time, right? So he had an unbelievable drive and work ethic, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, his was a 10. And his talent in basketball on a scale of 1 to 10 was a 10, right? So if he multiplies a 10 in terms of effort against a 10 in terms of talent, that's a 100. Perfect score, right? So that's why he's the Michael Jordan of basketball. But for those who remember, he actually took a break in his basketball career and he played baseball. He went because he played in high school and maybe in college, and he was a good athlete, but he always wanted to play baseball, right? So he took a break from being the Michael Jordan of basketball and applied that same work ethic to baseball. But he never rose above the minor leagues. He was average at best. And he realized even if he then continued to put that 10 of a 10 of effort against it, the best he was going to be was a 10 effort against maybe a 4, maybe a 5. So his top score is going to be 40 or 50. And only then, when he decided to go back to what he was a 10 at of basketball, he went back and he won 3 more championships. So I use that as an example of, if he had decided to still grind and put his 10 effort against something that he's not as good at, when he knows he's a 10 at basketball, he recognized it and went back. And I think it's a perfect example because people can do that, continue to put the effort against the things that they're not as great at, just so they can say keep a job or do these other things. And I understand in parts of people's careers they need to do that. But if we're thinking about what long-term success can be and where you can, realize the most extraordinary gains and extraordinary success, is putting your efforts and passion against the things that you're already naturally really good at. So that's how you win.
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe it's 80/20 rule, right? Principle, right? Maybe you focus 80% of your energy on things that you're really good at and spend 20% of your energy on working on weaknesses, right? To constantly, I believe, improving ourselves, right? Because we are
That's
not
right.
perfect. Let's just say that. Okay, let's talk about for people who are still in the autopilot and survival mode or grinding, as you said, in that state of mind, what is one small but powerful shift they can make today, to move from survival mode into real success and momentum and into flow, as you put it?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I asked them to start thinking about things is when you're grinding, I say envision yourself that you're in a rowboat. Okay, so you're in a boat,
Mhm.
and it's you, and you are putting in all that effort, and it's all on you to try to get to where you want to be. And imagine wherever you are, you're on a lake, you're in the ocean. It's hard work, and it's all on you, and you can only go so far, and you can only do so much. But what if, as opposed to thinking you're in a rowboat, what if you realize that you could be in a sailboat, right? So it doesn't mean that you just sit back and you have your hands behind you, you just sleep and you let the boat go. It's more like you can now be still deciding upon which direction where you're going, but you can be using the wind, right? You can be using the natural resources that are there for you. And if you can get to the point where you realize that there are things out in the world and in the universe that are here to help you, it's the first thing on that. And what I always recommend to people is to get quiet and think about that. Because as opposed to feeling like you're all alone and it's all on you to get this, realize that it isn't, right? So realize if you, I'm not telling you to stop rowing and just let it actually go, but like how else can you be looking for things that can help you? So I say on that is, I don't know, are you potentially starting to work with a coach? Are you doing some journaling and some exercises like the things that we talk about? Are you then taking maybe the Clifton's strengths finders as well as the Enneagram so you can get some insights on these things that you aren't feeling like you need to reinvent the wheel and do everything on your own? How do you learn from other people who have been through this before? To be able to then see that it's not meant to be like every day has to be a grind. It's all on you. And oh my gosh, what if it all falls apart? And so when that ends up happening, and not to get too deep for the short brief nature of the conversation, but I'm very much a believer in energetic vibration. And when you're more fear driven and more fear thinking, that's what you attract, right? And what I always say is, I remember hearing this, that the universe doesn't understand not, right? So it doesn't understand when you're thinking about the things that you don't want to have. All the universe hears is that.
Yeah.
And so, right? And so to be able to reframe things to be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go here. I don't want to go here. Or oftentimes if you're driving, like, I don't really want to go towards that line, you're going to end up going towards the line, right? So look actually where you want to be going as opposed to where you don't want to go. So that all levels back to identifying fear. Now, fear has a real, reason for being, and it's what got us through and our ancestors through from the previous stages here. But to be able to now recognize where it's hijacking us, and where we now can take back control, it's more than just positive thinking is what I'm saying, is that there's ways to actually do this, from journaling, from having conversations, to enlisting a coach, to using diagnostics to find out what you're really good at. And then as opposed to then working with that and blowing up your life, I always say to people is like, how do we begin where you are? And how is it that maybe in your current role, as opposed to quitting your job and going somewhere else, can we evolve your current role? Is there something else we can move into, as opposed to saying, I'm leaving from being a financial analyst and I want to go be a creative writer? Great. But that's going to be a pretty abrupt change and it might be a hard thing to do. So how do we get you from going from, a giant leap to a roadmap to how you evolve? Because I always say revolution is scary, but evolution is natural.
Hmm. Right. So before making a giant leap or making a huge life, career, relationship decision, what is the one question, or maybe I don't know, what are the couple of questions that we can ask ourselves to identify whether this decision that I'm making right now is driven by fear or driven by joy, for example, purpose or other positive things?
So I think that's another great question. Another thing, if we talk about, energetic vibration and a lot of things when we talk about manifestation,
Yeah.
they always recommend how you can truly do that is to think about who you'd be and how you'd feel in that new way, right? And they say it's very hard to get there if you're still thinking and operating from, the current position. Can you start thinking and operating from that? So to answer your question, when you're thinking about, is this fear driven or is this, not, I'd say is if you start kind of mapping out if what that new life would look like, how would you feel? What would be different, right? And again, I get back to that Peter Crone question. It was like, who would you be in the absence of your concerns? So if you think about who you'd be in this, new envisioned realm, how would life be different? And how do you think you'd feel, and what would your day look like? How would your hours be spent? What would the week look like? And if that really kind of resonates with you, I think that that's one of your north stars that shows it. But I'd also then recommend is like then talking to people who are currently doing the role, doing your investigation. So it's one thing to be heart driven and lead on that, but it's to be, I always say, more holographic thinking, is that it's leading with the heart as well as then incorporating the head on these things, is all right. So if I envision I'm in a different role, is there someone currently doing that role? Can you spend time with them? Can you take them to coffee? Can you go out and see what
Mm.
their lives are really like and what their day to day is? Does it actually match what you're thinking? Because despite how great you might feel, the job itself might not really fully align with what you want to be doing. So I really always recommend with people is, you can be heart centered, but also, we were gifted with our minds and with, a way to kind of build out strategy on this
Yeah.
is how do you use them in both before you make a big, upheaval in your life. And I think that that's really the best way to do it because as opposed to just leading with one or the other, find a way that you can actually do both. And there is a way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. I believe there is a way of doing it. So, you have shared so many incredible lessons and messages, and even insight strategies, I would say, with our listeners today. But if they can only take away one thing or one lesson from your journey or from your sharing today, what would you want it to be?
I'd ask them to ask them that question. Who would you be in the absence of your concerns? Envision that person, what it feels like, who you'd be and how is that different than who you currently are, and use that as your starting point for everything because that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to live with joy. And I think the real North Star on being able to do that is to feel who you'd be if you were less fear driven.
I love that. Yeah, you mentioned three times throughout the conversation, so I know how important that is. Now, so yeah,
And it's not even my quote. I mean, I give it to Peter. So I'm not even trying to, pump up my own sales. That's his, and I just feel like it's so powerful.
yeah, maybe you can rephrase it and make it your own.
Nah, it's his. I'll give him credit.
Yeah, again, why is that so important to imagine the person that you would be without fear? Like, why is that so powerful?
Because I think that that's the way that it's told in religious texts, it's told in all manifestation recommendations, is to see and feel who that person is in order to become him or her. And it can be a big road from where you are to where you want to go in that way. But the first way to identify the pathway is to see what it looks like, and then more importantly, how it feels. Because if you can start matching that feeling now, if we get back to energetic vibration, as you know, you end up attracting the same energetic vibration where you are. And when it's something that's less fear driven and more possibility and more authentic, that's where you can actually be led as opposed to trying to grind it all through as like, all right, this is what I know I need to do because I'm not enough right now, or this is what I should be doing because I've made it up in my mind that that's what I should be doing. Let's actually see what you feel like is the best version of you, but it's not coming from a point of fear. And that ends up becoming the starting point because you know that that's authentic.
Beautiful. Yeah, you got to show up as a person that you want to be before until you become that person, right? That's what I always believe as well. Now, Chris, is there anything else that you really want to talk about? Perhaps we didn't talk about or we didn't discuss in our conversation today.
No, I think we hit on everything. The points I always try to get across that I feel are most helpful for people is really to gain an awareness about what's holding them back from being the best version of themselves, and oftentimes that's fear as well as then not fully leaning into their strengths. And even if we talk about there's top five strengths, even if you're not doing all five of them all the time, if you realize you're only currently doing one or two, there's an opportunity to be doing at least a couple more. And so that starts with awareness, and then you can build a plan to execute against that, where you can actually see progress and get there, as opposed to feeling like, man, I've been thinking about this for a really long time and I haven't made any progress. So I really appreciate your inviting me, onto your podcast. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that what I've shared has been helpful for you and your audience.
Yeah, it is definitely. I'm learning so much from you. I'm getting so much more awareness than before. So thank you so much for that. Now tell people where they can reach out to you, connect with you, and yeah, if they want to work with you or hire you, get your books, which is the best place for me to send them.
Sure. So website is very simple. It's Chris Woods Coach. So it's a very easy name, Chris Woods with an S, coach.com. Email me directly, and it's chris@chriswoodscoach.com. Very simple. And then the book is available on Amazon. And as you referenced, it's called Balls and Brains, a framework for living your best life by overcoming fears and maximizing strengths.
And that summarizes our conversation today. I think that's you have a perfect title, right, for your book. That's basically the title that I will use as well for this conversation because that is just your message, right?
Exactly.
Thank you so much again for your time. And guys, I know you love today's episode because you are listening to the very end. And I hope it inspire you today to go connect with him, check out his book, and let's show him some love for being on the show. You'll find all the links and resources in the show note below. And thanks for listening. I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joanne podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag Find Joy Joanne _podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.